One ordinary day at home, I heard the doorbell ring, and I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was really surprised to see my neighbor from across the street holding a beautiful arrangement of Peruvian lilies. This was an unexpected expression of friendship, and I was delighted by it. I set the flowers in the middle of the house, basically so everyone could enjoy them. And every time I looked at the lilies, I thought, what a lovely neighbor. Even today, it's a really nice memory to recall. In our current worship series, we've been doing a bit of recalling ourselves, recalling why the church even matters today. In this series called Muscle Memory, we're taking a look at 5 adaptive muscles that can help churches stay fit, agile, and ready for God's now. Does anyone remember the first 3? What are the first 3 muscles we've talked about? Tending grief. Expanding imagination. It's open book. And navigating purpose. Absolutely. Tending grief, expanding imagination, and navigating purpose. Healthy congregations learn to process their pain, dare to try new things, and prioritize purpose over preference. This brings us to the important idea of knowing how to stay when it would be easier to leave. And let's be honest, in our culture, there's a whole lot of leaving going on. If we don't like something or someone, we rarely exhibit the patience to see if that person or situation will grow on us. We just make a snap judgment and we move on. The Gospel of Mark includes a story about a time when followers of Jesus got stuck in their judgment of someone who had been living and learning among them for quite some time. The incident takes place near the end of Jesus' public ministry, in the hometown of some of his closest friends, in the house of someone who would be considered not fit for company by most in the society. So we can imagine a group of outcasts, Jesus chief among them, gathered for a meal. In fact, let's see if we can imagine that scene together as I read the text again. While Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came in with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment of nard. And she broke open the jar and poured the ointment on his head. But there were some there who said to one another in anger, "Why was this ointment wasted in this way? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and the money given to the poor." They scolded her. And Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has performed a good service for me. For you always have the poor with you, and you can show kindness to them whenever you wish. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for its burial. And truly I tell you, wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her." She has done what she could. She has done what she could. It may come as no surprise that history does not definitively give us this woman's name. Some scholars insist that she is Mary Magdalene, one of Jesus' closest followers. Others say if she were Mary, then the writer would have given her name because she's introduced by name later in the story. But perhaps by leaving her unnamed in this story, the writer is attempting to shift the focus from assumptions that people might make about her and her relationship with Jesus to her actions at this moment. So let's focus on what we do know. The jar that the woman held was made of alabaster. It's a soft stone with a fine grain that was suitable for carving to hold precious ointments and oils. This particular vessel held pure nard, a fragrant oil made of a plant that was native in South Asia, 3,000 miles from where these people were sitting. And she uses every single drop to anoint Jesus. Others at the table decry her choice, calling it a waste of resources, irresponsible even. And what Jesus does next is so interesting. He doesn't discount the needs of the hungry. He praises the woman for seeing his need, for recognizing what the others could not allow themselves to acknowledge, even though he has told them previously what's going to happen in just a few days, that he will be arrested, that he will die before their eyes. But only the woman gets it. And she does what she can, not to resist the truth, but to prepare for it, to care for her friend, her neighbor, in a time of great need. Just as she had been taught, to care for her neighbor in a time of great need, just as she had been taught. So, what can we do? This is an essential question of discipleship, of following Jesus, when there's so much that we can't do in the face of injustice and suffering. What can we do, even if it means breaking a rule, written or unwritten? It's a question that Jesus himself asked and answered many times, much to the irritation of many of the religious leaders. Let's take a story from Luke chapter 13 for an example. This story takes place much earlier in the ministry of Jesus as he's making his way through Galilee. This time we can picture him in the synagogue on a holy day as crowds are growing, wanting to see this young rabbi with this reputation for hanging out with outcasts. I'll read verses 10 through 17. Now, he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had been crippled for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on these days to be cured, not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it to water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from bondage on this Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things being done by him. The entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things being done by him. In other words, Jesus was doing what he could. And we might say, well, Jesus could do a whole lot more than anyone else there, and certainly more than we can do. But what was he doing, really? Throughout his ministry, when Jesus saw that someone was suffering, what did he do? I'm really asking you, what did he do? This is one of the big ideas that we talked about last fall. He moved toward those who suffered, and he healed them quite often. He recognized their humanity, and he refused to walk on by and do nothing. Jesus' ministry was one of walking alongside. We see it over and over again in Jesus, this pattern of behavior that he embodies. We consistently see him reserving judgment and staying present and curious and offering assistance to those in need and calling those who follow to do the same. This is neighboring. This is what it means to be a good neighbor, to our literal neighbors, to people in our community, to strangers that we meet along the way. Good neighbors remain committed to reserving judgment against those who are different from us, to staying present with people we find difficult, to staying curious when we disagree, to offering assistance with no strings attached. And the result of this kind of living, the text tells us, is rejoicing. When people are treated as fully human, which is much better than they often expect to be treated, they rejoice. And that is good for the neighborhood. So here at Morning Star, I'd say we do a pretty good job of neighboring as a community. Our regular food distributions, our monthly ramp builds, our relationship, our daily interactions with the middle school next door, the work of our mission team that keeps us connected to needs in the community. These are great examples. And I want to thank you for flexing that muscle of outreach. There is one aspect of the practice of neighboring in which I think we could stand to develop a little more muscle memory, if I may be so bold to say, and that is as individual followers of Jesus in our interpersonal reactions with each other. We have some work to do with how we treat each other. We do much better than most churches, I'll say, but we have some work to do with how we treat each other and how we treat people in the world. We're only human, but as we grow in our faith, we can learn not to judge people for how they use their resources or how they express their need for healing. We can refrain from rolling our eyes and mumbling under our breath and talking about people behind their backs. This is something that we can do. By God's grace, we can do these things to be good neighbors, as the woman was to Jesus, as Jesus was to so many, even to those who would deny and betray him, by the way. It's something that we can do. We just need to flex some new muscle memory. So we're going to use our ring finger to help us remember this one. So remember, we're using our hands to help us memorize the 5 muscles. So hold up your hand, if you will. The thumb reminds us to tend to our grief. Expanding imagination is represented by our index finger. Remember, last week we gave the middle finger a new purpose with navigating purpose. And this week we're using our ring finger to help us remember to walk alongside, to be good neighbors. And to be a good neighbor is to reserve judgment, is to stay present and curious, and to offer assistance without expectation. And this requires much more spiritual maturity than we are willing to admit. This requires spiritual maturity. It requires patience. It requires the benefit of the doubt, and it requires humility. It requires us to ask ourselves honestly, who would we rather walk past than walk alongside? For this question to bear any fruit, we have to be honest about our own biases and our shortcomings. We must be willing to practice neighboring with courage. And sometimes the best place to start is simply by paying attention and doing what we can. That day that my neighbor brought me those flowers, she explained that they were a gift of gratitude because the day before I had noticed that her little dog was running up and down the street, knowing that my neighbor had left. She'd driven away a few minutes before. And because she was a good neighbor, she practiced neighboring, she had already given me her phone number. So I was able to call her and tell her what was going on with her dog and assure her that I would stay with the dog until she could return, which is what I did. Anybody would do that, right? We hope so. Why is it easier to help with dogs than it is with people? It took some interactions for us to get to that point, though, right? We had to introduce ourselves to each other. We had to be present with each other. And this is what builds a community. A willingness to share a valuable resource, the courage to care for someone when it's not convenient or popular, the presence of mind to stay present, to respond, to stay when it would be easier to leave. This is the way of Jesus. This is the art of neighboring, and it takes practice. Because it's only when we're willing to walk alongside each other rather than walk on by that we'll discover all the many ways that the church can matter today. Amen? Amen.